In your machzor, in your prayer book, we invite you to open up to the Torah service and the reading this morning, which, as it always is, takes us into the complicated family of our ancestors, Abraham and Sarah, and all of the attendant problems there. We begin on page 209, and chapter 21, the story of ostensibly Sarah and Hagar and Ishmael and that whole business. I just wanted to begin by saying that there's a whole lot of crying that goes on Rosh Hashanah. Everybody's crying on Rosh Hashanah, right? So
we actually just spent the week crying.
In preparation?
In preparation.
Oh, okay. It feels only fair that I should also use this mic here, the beam mic, because Rabbi Cohler says, okay. I'll turn this off. Okay. So let's talk about this complicated Torah story, this complicated chapter of the book of Genesis, because it's really troubling and difficult, on Rosh Hashanah to read this piece. So why don't you start us off with some thoughts that you're having that might lead us into, what are you thinking?
Well, I've been thinking about why are these stories so deeply painful? And then I was just sort of skimming over the story that we're in today about Sarah giving birth, and then the competition between Isaac and Ishmael, and Hagar and Ishmael being thrown out of the house. I was wondering, where's the happiness in this story? Is there any happiness? Or is there only crying?
Yeah, I don't think in some ways, if the rabbis wanted us to celebrate on Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, if the exclusive theme of Rosh Hashanah is, hey, let's celebrate, they didn't choose exactly the right Torah portions in order to do that. You know what I'm saying? That makes sense? So I can imagine very celebratory parts of the Torah, maybe creation. We should read creation. Some communities actually do that. They read only the creation narrative. Oh, the world was created. That's a theme. So why not have us read that? But clearly, for the rabbis, there's something about both this story and the story tomorrow that is extremely, as you said, sad. And I wonder where the happiness is. Is the happiness or the celebration of that in spite of everything, there's redemption. In spite of everything, there's a happy story at the end. Something ends well.
There's a couple of things. One is the story begins with a promise fulfilled, right? Sarah and Abraham have been waiting for decades for a child, and it starts with, and God visited Sarah, and as God said, and did to Sarah as God spoke. And there's a child. I mean, that's amazing. And you spoke about this last year, from impossibility to possibility. And then there's another child, Ishmael, who almost dies of thirst because Abraham and Sarah kick their handmaiden Hagar and Ishmael out of the house. Almost dies, right? Almost dies of thirst, but at the last minute is saved. So we begin with life and end with life, right? Maybe that's the redemption, right? It's birth, near death, life.
I love that. That is something to be happy about. It's something to be kind of to cause us to say, well, maybe God will remember me. Maybe things that I want remembered will be remembered. And there's also a piece here, especially as we've said, I think this morning I mentioned this, and maybe you don't know this, but this morning we're not having a shofar service. So if people came for the shofar service, I hope it's okay. We don't. There are many reasons given for not having a shofar service on Shabbat. They're quite flimsy, actually, but there's a tradition of not having a shofar service on Shabbat. And in some ways, it kind of underscores, the unspoken voice, or the voice that is silenced. And in some profound way, part of the redemption of this story is also that people whose voices weren't heard were finally heard. God heard the voice of the child, right, where he was. And God is willing to listen in, as it were. There's a sense of that listening happening.
But it seems like no one else is listening. I saw this poem recently by John O'Donohue. I miss the conversations we never had, right? And all these people in this passage are missing each other, right, are just staying on the level of conflict and maybe not of truth where vulnerability is.
So what do you think are some of the conversations that are not happening in this text that we need to listen to this morning?
Well, you and I were talking about, people often talk about the relationship between Hagar and Sarah, but you and I were talking about the conversation or the relationship between Abraham and Ishmael. Like, what's going on there? Clearly Abraham is pained about sending his child casting his child out of the house, right? He's pained. And God says to him, so it's okay. Why it's okay, I'm not sure, but God says, don't worry about your son, Ishmael, because I will make of him a great nation too. But still, Abraham casts his handmaiden that he sleeps with and the mother of his child and his child Ishmael out of the house with just a bit of water and a bit of bread.
So if I were Ishmael, I would say the same thing to you. I'd say, Abraham, I'd say, Dad, really? And I'm still getting feedback, Mark. It's really? I mean, I'm your firstborn. After all of the time we've spent together, it comes down to you have to make a choice between me and Isaac. Like, how could you do that? How could you do this?
I didn't have a choice. I had to make a choice because I didn't have a choice.
Are we gonna ever spend time together again? I mean, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. I mean, that's a good question out loud. I don't know.
I knew you'd be okay. I know I threw you out of the house, but I did know you would be okay. I knew you would survive. And I had to do this for Sarah.
Yeah, but what about my mom? I mean, doesn't she matter?
I had to do it really for God. God said that.
You do everything for God. You're always.
I do.
It's like, you're always like, it's like 24/7, God.
I was chosen by God. I mean, maybe I shouldn't have had a family because it's hard to, it's hard to have like work and family life here.
What kind of God
something has to
I know,
give.
seriously, something has to give, but what kind of thing requires that much dedication that you can't? I mean, you're out talking to people about God, but then you don't, what about us? Do you ever have time for us? What do you ever have time for? And now this, like, I know that you love me.
Understand about the sacrifices we have to make.
Okay, one day, okay.
You will understand one day. I know you will. I have faith that you will. That someday you might forgive me and understand how.
You know what? I might, but I don't know if I forgive Sarah. I don't know if I'll forgive Isaac. Isaac and I were close. Everybody was so nervous that like I was trying to take something from him, but they didn't understand brotherly bond. I didn't have a brother until Isaac, and I wanted a brother. And when he came along, and then it was all of you who made this whole thing about me, and we were good friends. I wanted to be like him.
You were making fun of him. Sarah at least told me that you were making fun of him.
Making fun of him? I was imitating him. But you can see that as making fun, but everybody loved Isaac more than me, so I had to be like him so that you would love me too. And I really loved him too. There was something about him he was more contained than me, more angular than me. I'm a little like a wild guy. I'm a para Adam, they said. I don't know, I'm a little bit wild.
You are wild, and that's what I love about you. I'm sorry that I can't keep you close to me.
I have a feeling, though, that, I don't know, maybe one day, I don't know. One day we'll reconcile, maybe, we'll come back.
I think maybe that will happen. And in fact, I think it'll happen through Yitzchak. I think he's going to bring the family together. Again, because you know me, I'm limited.
So is that why the Jewish people will continue to read this story each and every year, is because we represent what really happens in the world? Is that why we don't read stories that are these perfect stories of how creation is all good?
They'd be so boring.
It's not real.
It's not real.
It's like we have to hear these stories about family life because the family, right? Ishmael will make his appearance in our families. Isaac will make his appearance. Sarah will make her appearance. All of us will play out these stories. And the Torah wants us...
The favorite one and the one who's cast out.
Cast out.
The one who's exiled, the one we reject.
The unspoken stories.
Yeah, right.
Year after year, how many people walk into shuls and say, this year I'll have the conversation that I missed having. And we have a chance. It's almost like Rosh Hashanah says, you have a chance to finish the story, to have the story. Even if you didn't have a chance to tell the story, you might own that and tell the story in a different way, or tell the story you didn't tell going forward. Something like that. I don't know. What do you think?
I understand why Abraham felt like he didn't have a choice. I think we get so stuck in our family dynamics that it's hard to imagine something else. And that, in a way, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is here to give us the strength to imagine something else, to imagine the impossible, no matter how trapped we feel in our dynamics. Like, there is possibility. The promise can be fulfilled. Maybe.
Well, I wonder where it'll land for you this morning. As you're listening to the story and you're reading it and imagining that conversation that, an unspoken conversation that you'd like to have this year, or a dynamic that you'd like to change, or someone whose voice you'd like to lift up. And that's a kind of a powerful intention as we walk into this story. Any final thoughts for as we start reading this Akedah, this binding?
Yeah, one thought about possibility. I think my experience is often so much feels impossible, so much that we want, or even reaching another person feels like, wow, just out of reach. And I remember something my mother, may her memory be blessed, used to say to me a lot, which I always rejected then, but now, these years later, I hear it. And she used to say, God is big. In other words, there's more possibility than we can ever imagine. And it takes courage to even sort of go there and think about that conversation that feels impossible to have, but I want to have, right? Just rehearse it in your mind and say, oh, this is possible too, because God is big and God is all possibility.
Amen.